Attending a conference, making the most of your investment, episode 44. Are you ready to make your law firm a profit-generating machine that will free up your time and skyrocket your impact? With more than 2 decades of business growth experience and having proven that you can be successful while prioritizing your family and your impact, introducing the Profit with Law podcast. I am your host, the creator of the Firm Differentiator 10X Effect, Moshe Amsel. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Profit with Law. I'm your host, Moshe Amsel, and I wanted to take a change of pace from my usual information and content because this week is a very large conference in the legal industry, ClioCon, and I wanted to just share my own experiences on maximizing my time and maximizing my investment in a conference. Why should you care about this? Whether you're attending ClioCon or not, I am sure that you attend events, networking events, conferences at some point during the year. This should be helpful to you if you haven't been very strategic about it. So the first thing is to recognize what kind of sacrifice you are making by going and attending a conference. Number one, it's expensive. You pay for the entry fee to go. You pay to, usually, unless it's in your town, you pay to get on a plane and fly there, put yourself up in a hotel, potentially get a rental car, buy food, for every meal. So all of those expenses add up, and it ends up costing thousands of dollars to attend a conference. So that's the first thing, is you're making a financial investment to be there. So we want to make sure that you're getting the most bang for your buck. The second thing is that you're taking time away from important other things. First, you're taking time away from your business, from your law firm. And if you're not set up properly to have things operate while you're away, then essentially you're not working and you're not generating revenue. So you're basically taking a hiatus for those few days and maybe even as long as a week because of this conference. So that is costing you in momentum. It's costing you in actual dollars that could have been generated by you working. Or the worst thing is that you're bringing your work with you and you're now trying to do your work and attend a conference and get the most out of it. So time away from business. And then the last thing is, and it's really the first thing, but save the worst for last, is time away from family. I know personally, I'm about to get on a plane to go out to California and leave my wife by herself with my 2 little ones. My grown girls are they'll be fine with me gone for a few days, but the little ones, it could be really difficult. And I'm going to miss them and they're going to miss me. And, but it's also going to create challenges for my wife, who I need her to support me so that I can go out there and go there with a clear mind and be able to get the most out of it. So it's expensive, time away from your business, time away from your family. There's a lot of sacrifice that you're making to be there. So why not make sure that you're fully intentional about being successful with why you're going? And there are so many people who go to a conference just because it seems like a cool thing to do. It seems like the thing that everybody else is doing. Let me go out there and just hang out with a bunch of people for a few days. And it could be so much more valuable to you. So that's what I wanted to spend the rest of the time here on this episode with you talking about, is how to make sure that you're making the most of that time. So one thing that I've learned from one of my business mentors is, whenever you start something like this, whenever you start an event, you start something where you're supposed to either grow personally or grow your connections or grow in a different way that you're normally growing, it's helpful to really take a moment to clear your mind and set your intentions for why you're doing this. And there are 3 main intentions why somebody would go to a conference and what they would expect to get out of being there at that conference. The first is to learn. So somebody might go to a conference to attend the sessions and to learn from those sessions. The second would be to network, to grow your connection of people in the industry, peers that would be helpful to be connected with for whatever reason. So network is a second, or if you're going to an industry conference, so if you're going to a conference related to specifically to where your target market would be, then your networking intention would be to connect with potential clients and start establishing those relationships. And then the last would be to connect with an influencer. Now, influencer is a word that is used in the circles of, where I am, speakers, coaches, authors. You might not be familiar with that word. An influencer is somebody who has influence over a large body of people. So it's usually speakers on a large stage are usually influencers. They usually have a following of people that every time they put out a post on social media or every time they send out an email, there are a bunch of ears and a bunch of eyeballs that are paying attention to what they're saying. So you might have the plan of connecting with an influencer, connecting with somebody who is a key player for whatever reason. So it might be because you want to be coached by them, or it might be that you want them to introduce you to somebody else, or you might have some other reason to make that connection. So that's the last of the three major intentions that I can come up with for going to a conference. Now, you might have a totally different intention, which is fine. Like maybe your intention is simply to switch gears, get away from the office and spend a few days in a different environment, but not taking off of work and still making yourself a better person. But your real intention is downtime for you. And if that's the case, then it's important to set that up front, because it's very easy to attend one of these conferences, spend your day morning to night attending sessions, going to networking, events and after event parties to meet people. And before you know it, you've been running yourself ragged for 3 days and did not do anything to take the downtime and help yourself. So that's why getting clear on why you're going, like what is your intention, is so important up front, because it's really going to dictate how you conduct yourself over the next few days while you're there. So I want to dive into each of these three areas and just go a little bit deeper and give you some of what I'm doing and what you might want to consider to think about either before you head out there or while you're there. So if your intention is to learn, to basically enhance your knowledge of whether it's the area of the practice of law or your specific practice area, or whether it's something to enhance your sales and marketing or to increase the productivity in your firm, whatever it is, if your intention is to learn, the first thing that you should be doing is reviewing the agenda of the sessions that are going to be available, paying close attention to the times of those sessions, how close they are to each other, whether there's overlapping sessions, and start to identify the sessions. And what I do is I break them into three categories. So first, I have the must-go-to sessions. These are the sessions that I have to go to. This is why I'm going, and I'm going to identify those and make sure that they're in my calendar. I know what time they're starting. I'm there on time. I get a good seat, and I'm ready to learn. Those are my must-go-to sessions. From there, I have the sessions that they sound interesting. I'd like to go to them, but if I miss it or I'm late or, I end up not getting a seat and I'm standing the whole time, so I'm not able to fully pay attention, concentrate, and absorb everything, it's not the end of the world, because it sounds really cool and, I'd love to attend it, but it's not something that I have to go to. Those are the I'd like to go to sessions, and that's basically the second category. And then the third is I could care less, right? I could care less about this topic. I have absolutely no interest in being there. If I sit in this room, I will be wasting 30 to 60 minutes of my time. And it's important to identify those too, because you don't want to be sitting in that room. That should be time that you take for yourself to either get away from the conference to, go to the beach or go to the pool or, go out to eat or network with other people. Take some time for yourself or spend some time in some of the other areas that you might want to be focusing on other than learning, and don't waste your time in that session. So again, the first thing is to identify the sessions in 3 categories: the ones you have to go to, the ones that you would like to go to, and the ones that you should make sure to stay away from. Then the next thing is that when you attend the session, you should attend ready to absorb the information. Now, everybody learns in a different way, and everybody consumes in a different way. But one thing I know for certain, and that is that if you sit there, butt in chair, pay attention for the entire session, and take no notes, have no recording, no way to replay it, and you leave that session, chances are that you have wasted your time. Not because you haven't absorbed the information, but because you have no way to review it, go back to it, to remind yourself of the things that triggered you during the session, that you're like, oh, I have to do this. And you're not learning. So take yourself back to when you were a student in college or in law school, and think about how you learned then when you were being tested on it, when you needed the knowledge for future reference. You didn't just sit there in the lecture hall and listen, and or you had a textbook to go back to. So if that was the way that you learned, you probably were going back to the textbook to read, or you were using somebody else's notes. So you always had a way that you learned, and you need to start thinking about that. Like, how do I learn? What is the best way for me to learn? So for example, for me personally, taking notes while somebody is speaking is very effective for me. However, what I find is that I'll start writing notes, and I'll be on something that they said 5 minutes ago that I'm still writing notes about, and now I miss the next 5 minutes of what they're saying, right? So that's the problem for me with note-taking. So what I started doing is I started recording audio. So I just use my iPhone, and I go to the voice recorder app, and I just hit the record button. So I record the sessions so that I can go back and fill in the gaps. I could just go back and listen. Maybe when I get back home, when I go for a run, I can listen to the talk again. And then there's some events where you can purchase the replays. So if you know that you can buy the recordings and you plan to do that, then you don't have to be worried about recording it yourself, because they're doing that for you. They're taking care of that for you. But if you take notes a certain way, if you need a certain notebook or a certain pen, or, make sure that you have that packed, make sure that you have that ready, make sure that you come to the session, especially the must-go-to sessions that we identified earlier, make sure that you come with the right stuff to be able to take your notes, or to be able to record, or in some way go back to the information so that it will be useful for you later. And then along the same lines of being useful for you later, the last thing is that a lot of times people take boatloads of notes at a conference, then they go home, and that notebook is never opened again. It's never looked at again. And you're probably sitting there listening to me and nodding your head and saying, yep, I do that. Because most of us do. And it's not because it's because of a lack of intention, honestly. It's simply because we allow our usual life, our usual routine to take back over when we get home, and we're not intentional about making use of the information that we gathered. So what I like to do, and this is not for everybody, because a lot of people have, when you're on your way home, you just want to relax, or I know a lot of people like to just put on a movie or go to sleep. I take the red eye home from California, so I'd like to sleep. I end up never sleeping, because this is what I do. On my way home, I crack open the notebook and I review my notes from the prior 3 days. And I start to make a list for myself of things that I want to implement, things I want to change, things I want to go back and review. And I kind of get really intentional about what I'm going to do with the information that I just learned, and how am I going to actually put that into practice in my business when I get home. And I think that whether you do it on the plane or whether you take a day when you get back, having a plan of what you're going to do with those notes, what you're going to do with those recordings, and how you're going to make sure that you go back to them and actually take actionable, real action steps from what you've learned to make yourself better, to make your firm better, to make your family life better, whatever you learned in those notes, and you now have something to take away and improve upon, you need to have a plan for that. So much so that you might want to schedule time slots in your calendar for this. So just if you block out, I find that if I block out an hour on my calendar, then I won't have any conflicts during that hour, and I can actually do what I set out to do. Now, sometimes procrastination kicks in, other things that, distractions, and I might not make the best use of that hour. But if I don't have it on the calendar, it's certainly not happening. So that might be something that you want to do, is to just put it on the calendar. Just plan ahead before you even head out to the conference. Put in a few time slots for in the following week to, decompress from the information, decompress from the conference. So that is what I'd like to do, and what I think that you should think about when it comes to learning as your intention for attending the conference. Now, let's talk about if your intention is to network with other people. Now, there's a lot of different things with networking. We can make a whole separate episode on the art of networking and overcoming the fear of the introduction, and why are we so afraid to just go over to somebody and say hello? What is going to happen? First of all, that person has no idea who you are. So until you say hello and introduce yourself, there's zero risk. Then when you introduce yourself, now they know who you are. But what are they going to do? They're going to say bug off. The chances of rejection in a networking setting is pretty slim. And so the fear that we have of breaking the ice and saying hello to somebody is just completely unreasonable and doesn't make any sense. And just, if we can overcome that, and some people are extroverts and they have no problem with this, but there are people who struggle with it. So that's the first thing is, you need to be willing to just break the ice with people. And what I find is that practice makes it easier. So just practice. Just every time that you see somebody, just tell yourself, this is practice. Eventually, I'll start connecting with people for real, but this is practice. And then you just go over and introduce yourself. And guess what? After enough practice, you'll realize that you've been doing the real thing the whole time, and all the practice did was get you comfortable with it. But let me go back. So networking, once again, you want to set your intention up front. You want to get clear on who it is that you are trying to connect to, whether you are trying to connect with peers who are in the same practice area, or you're trying to connect with peers who are of a firm of the same size as yours, or if you're a female firm owner and you're trying to connect with other female firm owners. Whatever the criteria is of the type of people that you want to be meeting, get clear on who that is for two reasons. Okay, now you're not going to be able to see somebody from across the room and say, wow, that person looks like they have 3 associates and a $2.5 million firm, and I'm going to go say hello to them because they fit my profile. That's not going to happen. Now, if your profile is a female law firm owner, then chances are at a law firm conference, if any female you see is going to have a pretty high probability of fitting your criteria. So I say this in that the purpose of getting clear on who you want to connect to is not for how to target who you're going to talk to. It's for how to control the conversation once you start networking. Because have you ever been to a networking event where you go over to somebody, you introduce yourself, you get comfortable talking to them, you get deep into conversation, and before you know it, the hour is over and you've connected with nobody else other than that person? That is what we want to prevent from happening, especially if your intention of going is to network. If your intention of going is to network, then the purpose of networking is to start the relationships with a lot of people and hope that over time, some of them will turn into real longer-term relationships. And people make the mistake of thinking that by putting an hour in up front instead of 15 minutes up front, you have increased your chances of that relationship turning into something more down the road. And that's not really the case, right? Because more often than not, we have that hour conversation and then we never follow up. We never call that person back. Or that person never calls us back. And it ends up turning into nothing anyway. So The key here is to get volume over quality, quantity over quality when it comes to networking, because the real quality doesn't happen in that first conversation anyway. So as soon as you can embrace that, now when you get clear on who, you can say, okay, if I introduce myself to somebody and then I find out that they're not somebody who fits my profile, then I'm going to be really nice and, keep the conversation under X number of minutes. So let's say keep the conversation under 3 minutes. You set yourself a little internal timer in your head and you're fully present for those 3 minutes, and then you excuse yourself. And, and there's so many different ways to excuse yourself. You can say, I'm sorry, I need to excuse myself. I have to go to the restroom, or I have to take a phone call, or I need to excuse myself. There's somebody that I see over there that I really wanted to say hello to. Let's catch up later. And you extract yourself from that conversation and you move on. Also, if you're collecting business cards, you're collecting, and we're going to talk about this in a few minutes, but if you are gathering some sort of mechanism to keep in touch with people, you want to, if you end up taking their business card, you want to identify it as somebody that you have no interest in following up with afterwards, or just not ask them for a business card, or if they offer it, you say, no, that's okay, I don't need one, and you just don't collect it in the first place. So you're not following up with somebody who you really don't have any interest in continuing to talk to, because this, networking is an art. It can be overwhelming, and if you create more work for yourself by having conversations with I don't want to say it in a way that sounds crude, but the reality is that having unnecessary conversations with people who you really don't want to be talking to is a waste of your time. And it's going to slow down your progress in the networking game, and it can defeat you. So if you think that you need to establish relationships with everybody you come in contact with, then that itself is going to be a real issue for you. So you really need to get clear on who it is that you want to connect to. Now, once you're clear on who it is that you want to connect to, the next thing that you want to think about is, how am I going to remember people I meet and conversations that I have? And you might think that you have a great memory and it's not a problem. And for some people, it really is not a problem. But for a lot of people, it's a real problem, and you don't recognize it until after it's over and done with and it's too late. Now you go home, you have a stack of business cards, and you cannot remember for the life of you who this person is. I don't remember meeting them. I don't remember the conversation we had. I don't remember anything about them. And now your grand scheme and plan to follow up with these people goes to crap because you're afraid to call them. You don't remember anything you talked about, and you're afraid that they're going to say, oh, so nice chatting with you, and I really enjoyed blah blah blah, and you don't know what that is, right? Or even worse, you might ask a question that they already answered in the first conversation, and we don't want to be there. So our fear of doing that and screwing up is going to stop us from making that phone call in the first place, reaching out to that person in the first place. So collecting business cards is not a good plan by itself. And so you have to have a plan of how you're going to remember people and how you're going to remember conversations. So here's a couple of things that I do. First, I'm terrible with, or at least I tell myself that I'm terrible with remembering people's names. And I do struggle with it, but I have found something that really works for me is using their name in conversation. And this does two different things. One is once I've said their name 3 or 4 times, I remember their name at least for the moment. Which is good, because at a conference with, X number of people, the chances of running into that person again over the course of the time that you're there can be pretty high. So if I see that person, I want to be able to say, oh, hey, Allison, how are you? Remembering their name is really important for that reason. And the second is because if you use their name, people love to hear their name. They just feel really good when you use their name. So if in conversation you mention their name, they're not going to be sitting there saying, oh, wow, he used my name. That's not how it works. But subconsciously, they get a greater affinity to you. They like you more because you use their name. So you and I meet, we start talking, and then you say, so Moshe, what do you do? And then I tell you, and you say, so Moshe, do you have a family? So you just, every time that you're going to ask a question, you just preface it with the person's name, and then boom, you're using their name naturally in the conversation. Doesn't seem weird. It might seem weird to you because you're being intentional about it, so you're actually focusing on it, but it does not seem weird to the recipient because they don't know that that's what you're doing. They just think that you really like them, and they're now really liking you. So it's a really good plan because use their name 2 or 3 times in conversation, 3 or 4 times in conversation. You're more likely to remember it, and they're more likely to like you and remember you. So that's step number 1 as far as remembering names. Now, the other thing that I do, and this is harder to do because we want to be inconspicuous about it because we don't want people to think negatively about us. Honestly, I don't care. Like now I do it. I don't care if they see. I even do it while we're talking. So what I do is I take their business card. Hopefully they gave me one. If not, then I carry a little notebook with me. I take their business card, I flip it over, and on the back, I write notes about our conversation. And I've gotten to the point where I do it with them, and I just simply say, look, I want to remember who you were when I look at this card when I get back home. So if it's okay with you, as we talk, I'm just going to jot down a couple of notes about what we spoke about so that when I look at the card and I look at the notes, I'll remember our conversation. And then when I say it that way, people are like, oh, wow, that's so genius. I wish I would have thought of that. It's not weird at all. They don't have a problem with it. And then you can jot down notes even while you're speaking. But if not, right after the conversation, you walk away, you pull their card out, take out a pen, just jot on the back, jot a couple of notes. Married, 3 kids, kid just graduated high school, their practice area is this and that, now you probably don't have to write their location. They probably have their address on their card, but you get the idea of the things that you might want to write on the back of the business card. And then the question is, do you have your own business cards and have you brought them with you? And now I'm very resistant to this because in today's day and age, I'd rather connect with somebody on LinkedIn when I meet them and, have a better, more access to them than a business card would give. But business cards are good because it allows you to put all these people in one pile, and therefore remember these are the people I met at CleoCon. These are the people I met at this and this bar association event, and that is helpful. Also, you can write on the back of the business card. You can't do that on a LinkedIn connection. You could take notes on your phone, which is another option. But then people, that sometimes it feels like you're not, although you say you're taking notes on the phone, it might look like you're taking notes on the phone, but they also are wondering whether while you're talking to them, you're responding to an email, So I try not to use my phone in these settings for that reason. I don't want people to not come over and say hello to me because it looks like I'm busy on my phone. And I don't want people who I'm talking to think I'm disinterested in the conversation. So if I'm taking notes on their business card, they know that I'm writing down stuff that we're talking about. That's the opposite of disinterested. So the question is, do you have your own business cards? Because that is essential for the recipient on the other side to have a chance of remembering you and have a chance of them following up with you, which takes part of the work out of it if instead of you reaching out to them. Talking about follow-up, that's the last step in networking is you need to plan for follow-up. Relationships don't happen just because you shook hands and then you went on your merry way. They happen because after you shook hands, somebody took the initiative to continue a dialogue between the two of you. And that dialogue may not bear any fruit on day 1, 2, 3, or 4. It might be 3 years in the making, which is why networking is so hard because it's very hard to follow up with so many people. But you can, make it very strategic and put it in your calendar. So what I like to do is when I come back, I hand the stack of business cards to my assistant. I have her scan it in, add each person as a contact into my contacts, and then go into my calendar over the course of the next 3 or 4 weeks and just schedule short little time slots for me to pick up the phone and reach out to people I met and just say, hey, it was nice meeting you. I really enjoyed our conversation about XYZ. Remember, I took notes. So by doing that, I'm doing 2 things. Number 1 is I am telling them that I remember what we spoke about. Your conversation with me was very important to me, and therefore I remember what we talked about. Now, chances are they didn't remember who you were until you said that. So the other thing you're doing is you're reminding them who you are, because once you say what you talked about, they probably didn't talk about exactly the same thing with everybody they spoke to. So now in their mind, they're able to remember who you are. They're able to imagine your face because they remember the conversation that you trade. So you basically are allowing them to create, by association, create that memory of who you are and the fact that they met you, which is a key to the success. So you're basically going to say, I enjoyed talking about this and this. I'd love to stay connected with you. Why don't we put something on the calendar to connect again in a little while? And then you can put something on the calendar. Or if you don't want to be that specific about it, you can have that initial call to just follow up and let them know that, hey, I care about you. And then you just put it on your calendar for 3 months later to reach out to them and say hi again. And you can just keep doing that. And every 3 months you check in and say hello. And that's really the way to build relationships with networking, is to continue to have a touch point every once in a while. So once every 3 months is probably enough to stay in somebody's memory and be able to be brought top of mind again, and then, have them forget about you and then remember you again the next time. So that's basically what I do with networking and how I remember people and how I create these relationships that hopefully turn into something. And some of them do, some of them don't. But if I don't do any of this, then I walk away from an event with a stack of business cards that end up getting moved from drawer to drawer and eventually get thrown out, and I did absolutely nothing with them. Now, the third intention you might have had is to connect with an influencer, and this I'm going to keep really short. The only question that I have for you is, what's your plan? How do you plan to connect with one of the speakers at the event? Now, sometimes you have full access to the speakers. They're there present in the event with you. You can just catch them at any of the networking breaks, any breaks in between sessions. They might be attending sessions themselves. So you might have plenty of access to them, or the access may be limited. So if your intention is to connect with a speaker, find out whether there's a VIP pass or some other way that will put you with that person. Sometimes there's a VIP pass that gives you access to a speaker dinner where you can have dinner with the speakers. And I did this once when I went to an event in Dallas, Texas. And that was an extremely impactful dinner, and the relationships that I created by sitting there rubbing elbows with some people that I really felt were going to help me take my business to another level was really impactful. Turns out that what I was building at that point has changed, and I'm not doing that anymore. But that was a huge opportunity for me that just when I bought it, and it cost, I think it was like $700. When I bought it, I was like, I don't know if this is worth it. It certainly was. So if this is your intention, then you need to look for opportunities to be able to have that opportunity to create that face-to-face. And then the other thing is that it could be very intimidating to introduce yourself and talk to somebody like that. And the thing to remember is that they're people too, right? They're just an ordinary human being. They also have their own fears. They also have, and they've been where you are, right? They didn't start off on stage. They got there after working their way to that spot. So it wasn't a happy accident that they ended up there. And that is the thing to remember. They're just like you. They just might be a few steps ahead of you, but they're just like you. So you could just connect with them the same way you would connect with anybody else. So just don't make it an unnatural thing, and it won't be. Don't make it a scary thing, and it won't be. So that's what I have for connecting with an influencer. I hope that this was helpful for you. I'm sure that there's something here that you probably aren't doing or didn't think about that you could implement. So thanks so much for listening. And I am looking forward to our next episode. I've got a good interview coming up for you in a couple of days. So have a great day. That's it for this week's episode of Profit with Law. If you have enjoyed the show, please consider sharing it with at least one person. Imagine how many lives we can change if we each shared this episode. Another way to share the episode is on social media. We appreciate your support and look forward to you joining us again next week.